go. All right. Dave. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm, though yes, I work for Cherrystone Auctions, which is based out of the New York, New Jersey metro area. I live full-time in St. Louis, Missouri, so I drove up earlier today and not too far away here, and blessedly the temperature and weather didn't change very much in the 190-mile drive. I'm here in a sense to supplement what was going to be Tom's slot for a presentation here, and we got into a conversation which you'll understand a little more as I get into this around an idea for a presentation based on the two of us working together on a project related to an upcoming auction. Before I start, I actually wanted to say I was going through the free bin just to sort of see what was there, and there's a cover with two of my 4 favorite stamps, which are the stamp collecting stamps from 1986. They were the precursor stamps that led up to the 1986 International Show, and here we are, just a few months away from the 2026 International Show. So I always felt as a kid, so I started collecting stamps in 1993, I was 7, and these stamps to me just spoke to me. They were like stamps about me. And what I really liked about them was that they were issued just 2 weeks before I was born. So my 40th birthday, as I just passed their 40th birthday, is this upcoming Monday. And so these stamps, wherever I see them, I always think about just the early connection and interest I had in this hobby, in this pursuit, and it sticks with me to the current point. You'll see how I've been able to rope my kids into all this as well. And the fun thing for me is my son is 7, and he's about to experience I did not go in 1986 at 4 months old to the show, but I'm excited that my son will have this kind of same interest and connection with the Boston stamps that came out in August, for example. All right, so Going, Gone, Exploring Philatelic Auctions is a bit of a presentation that I put together with Tom's encouragement. So we're going to talk a little bit about philatelic auctions and kind of a little bit about their history and the excitement, and as you mentioned about an auction next meeting, we'll talk about club auctions. Then I'll switch to tell you a little bit more about Cherrystone and kind of preparing auctions and what that looks like. And then we're going to talk about an upcoming auction that I'm working on now, which features Tom's collection of Confederate States material, which is what led us to this point. This is actually a picture of me in an old Streets of Detroit exhibit that's in Detroit, Michigan, in the basement floor of the Historical Society. They have this incredible to-scale sort of multi-street version of old Detroit. And I always love this sort of auction and commission storefront they had, and so that's here we are now. The very first stamp club meeting I went to was at the West Suburban Stamp Club in Michigan in about 1994-95, and at every meeting they had a small auction. And so these are pictures of different club auctions. One of them is in Missouri. Another one of these was in Washington State. This is in recent years, but the connection of stamp collecting, stamp clubs, and auctions are interwoven, especially in the United States. So in a sense, most collectors that engage a stamp club are almost certainly going to be participants or observers or consigners to a club auction or something like that. And to me, it's been the sort of lifeblood of how I think about the social aspect of philately, that you don't have to have a $100,000 collection or $1 million stamp. You don't have to be bidding on a very expensive item to participate in philatelic auctions, because they occur almost every single day in some place around the United States, if not multiple places, at stamp clubs still, in addition to philatelic auction firms. My son, this is Winston, this is him participating in 2024 and then 2025 at an annual auction that takes place at the Greater Mound City Stamp Club. They have a really great program where for every time you attend a meeting, just an idea potentially for the club here, every time you attend a meeting, you get a certain number of points as a club member. And then once a year, all the club members bring items to consign to a single night's auction, but all of the money that can be spent at the auction are just the points that you have accrued throughout the year. So every time you attend a meeting, you get 100 points. If you give a presentation, you get 150 points. If you volunteer at the club show, you get a certain number of points per hour, and so forth. And there's one person who kind of keeps track of everyone's points as you go, and it's really, really fun. And so for Winston to have 1,750 auction bucks is about he feels that he's just as wealthy as can be and loves bidding on things and deciding what he's going to bid on. So I basically will get a question about once a week for 51 weeks leading up to this sale around when is the big auction, when is it coming? But again, this is a 7-year-old, in 2026, and to him, stamp collecting, what he acquires, is so tied up in the excitement of this auction environment. And so I think about auctions all the time, especially as it relates to how do you keep young people or sort of new people interested. So last year, I took Winston to an auction, actually in Michigan, a local small auction, Philatelic auction. This is him going through some box lots, which was really quite fun. And he pointed a box lot. He's still learning to read, so he would say, "What's in this one?" And I would read the auction description for him, and he would open it up and start looking. And he'd ask me questions. And then, of course, he wanted to take a look at the only stamp that really excited him was a penny black. That's an example of an 1840 penny black, the very first stamp an example of the first stamp to ever be issued by Great Britain. And there he is right there holding it. And so his birthday was coming up shortly thereafter. And so we decided on a budget that he'd have, and he was going to place a bid on his own for this stamp, and he won the stamp. So he will, to him, the first sort of stamp of the world is also connected to his very first time participating in a real philatelic auction. So I'm excited about that. Now again, auctions can take, as you saw these boxes here, they can take many forms. You can have whole roomfuls. You can have an entire auction can be built on just single stamps. Examples of just some examples from early Great Britain and British Commonwealth. I have seen whole rooms, whole floors of houses filled, organized and not organized, though these look pretty organized. These are just single walls from multiple walls in different places. So auctions can take all these different forms, and so part of the goal tonight is to give you just a sense of what that looks like, talking about Tom's collection and our conversation, any questions you have. I forgot to mention at the beginning to please, there's no question in a sense that's off limits. So if it's related to valuation or how auctions come together or considerations we make as auctioneers or things you should be thinking about as a collector, as a buyer, as a bidder, we really do welcome those questions, and I'm excited for where the conversation takes us. One of the most exciting auctions that I had a chance to just be in the audience for was an auction about a little bit under 7 years ago in New York. This is a cherry stone auction, actually, and the picture is actually perfect because it's sort of, I can point out different people as what their role in the auction was. But this was the New Amsterdam collection. It was a single owner collection. So the only thing for sale that day in a single catalog was just what was in this one particular collection. So it was not many different collectors and consigners to that auction. It was just the one. And it included a wide variety of some of the United States' most difficult to acquire and most expensive stamps. So a series of incredibly rare early U.S. grill stamps, one of the rarest coil pairs, and it was really exciting because at the end of the auction, we're talking about several $1 million worth of stamps had been sold, including a couple that were between $750,000 and $1.5 million for just a single stamp. So that they were nice enough to let me kind of paw through the one box that all of these stamps fit in, and to pull them out and to take some pictures of just me, just holding the stamps. And so to give a sense, this is the 10-cent Z grill at the very top, and then this is the one of only two Z grills, the 15-cent Z grill, which I think sold for 1.2 or 1.4 million dollars or whatever it was. So when you think about by per weight, some stamp items really are unbelievably expensive on a per weight basis. So just to go back to talk about sort of the mechanics of an auction room, I would love to tell you that every single live auction that takes place at Cherry Stone or any competitor in the United States has a room filled with people in it, ready to, with their arms outstretched to begin the bidding. But trust me when I tell you that the number of people in this room tonight is more people by far than the average American auction has live on the floor for any sale in the course of the year. If you have one person or two people in the audience that are bidding live, that's a high attended sale. So in this picture, actually, it's an interesting combination. So you have the person calling the auction. That's Paul Buxbaum, who's the chairman of the firm. The Cherry Stone was founded in 1967. Paul I believe he was 14 years old at the time when his father founded the firm. And he has been involved in operation, including a few years later when his father unexpectedly passed away, when he became the head of the auction of the firm. So next year will be 60 years of continuous full-time work in the auction business for Paul, which is extraordinary. And as far as I can tell, it's certainly the longest tenure of any U.S.-based auctioneer, and I believe it's to be also the case for worldwide. His son Josh, who's the president of the firm, is behind him, and he is operating a combination of the bids that come in from people who submit them ahead of time, where the auction house is representing that person and their bids as the lots go on, as well as we use a couple different live platforms. So Josh is on one, and these two people here are on another platform. So as the auction is going, we're updating different live platforms with that. Some people that are based in Europe, some people that are based in the United States, bidders all over the world. So in effect, these individuals are representing bids as they come online. And so if a bid happens, effectively Josh would say, bid, and so the auctioneer is paying attention to the audience, which is sort of where we're seated, as well as to the bids that come in through online. Now, Josh in the back could have 100 bidders that come through across a given sale. So it's only, he basically is indicating that a bid has come through, and once the lot is hammered down to one of his bidders, then he'll say it's bidder, I 395, internet bidder 395, for example. And so it remains, it still is a anonymous to the audience, but you don't know if he has 6 people bidding, etc., until the very end when you know who has won. This is a very famous, unfortunately just passed away somewhat recently, auction agent named Frank Mandel. Frank was around for, he was a longtime philatelist in a different professional field, and decades ago got into philatelic auction agenting, which is unfortunately, in a sense, a dying breed or category of the auction world. The auction agent in a pre-internet time would be the person who you would give bids to, and they would be the ones that would physically present themselves at an auction for you, and they would represent your bids based on whatever you're bidding on. So it was a way to keep your bids from being known to the auction house in advance, and this person was effectively your representative, your agent at the auction. Probably the most interesting aspect of when I first saw an auction agent, I remember something happening that always surprised me. So he's bidding against so he's bidding against the internet, whatever. Lot number 1 opens at $100, and so the agent will raise his hand, 200, 300, 400. It's going back and forth, and then the agent will win. So it's okay. Agent's bid $1,000, and then the agent will say must sell for $3,500. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I thought this person just won for I thought the agent just won for $1,000. But what had happened is that the agent had more than one bid on the same lot. So in effect, he does another auction that's taking place where the client that bid one increment over the other client is actually the winner. So does that make sense? So the idea basically is that you don't know, the agent does not reveal that he has many different people that have bid on the same lot that have given him their bids. It's only in order to keep the cards close to his vest on behalf of his clients that he then reveals basically, no, there's actually more bidding action that's taking place between my clients that have given me a bid, and so that's why the lot must sell for X amount. It was really startling the first time I saw it, and then I understood.
So it is sold at that point for $1,000, but really for something else.
No. It simply when the bidding had stopped in the room at $1,000, but basically, so possibly, the auctioneer may have had a bid for $3,250 from one client and $10,000 from the other client. So the client that wins is one increment, $250 more than the second place client who bid $3,250. So, but as far as the room and the auction is concerned, that bidding, they don't know that bidding exists because it's all been bids that have been given directly to the agent. Most of what an agent does now is taking place by the internet. So a combination of, most auction platforms, ours as well, you can put your bid in ahead of time, and like eBay, it executes for you as bids come in. So it keeps you going until whatever your limit is. And similarly, people sit in their pajamas at home and just bid online live and are their own agents, or they do it by phone. And so in this picture, over here, there are a lot of people that are sitting here with phones for people that want to participate by telephone. So they'll say, I want to bid on lot number 7, and so at lot number 4, a person who works for the auction firm will call them and say, hi, this is Alex from Cherrystone. Are you ready to bid on lot number 7? And they say yes. The reason why they, by the way, never say their name, they don't say, hello, Mr. Smith, this is Alex, is because the goal again is to protect the privacy of that individual. So they'll say, hi, this is Alex from Cherrystone, so that no one else in the room knows who's on the phone. It's all about trying to protect bidders and to be able to not give away any edge to anyone else in that space, to try to create as much sort of, I don't want to say secrecy, but just giving everyone the anonymous nature that they would like. If they want to announce to the world after the auction's over that they've won a certain stamp, that's their business, but that the auction firm is meant to protect their clients' sort of privacy. All right, so let's keep going. All right. So I had a chance, I'm very fortunate to have joined Cherrystone a little bit over a year ago. And this is also, by the way, I'm very pleased to be back at the club here. I have to thank Dan Harding for facilitating my very first club meeting presentation, which was in June, related to the Midwest Stamp Dealers Association show, which was really great. The first time I ever been invited or did a presentation club meeting combined with a show, which I have then since told to about a dozen other stamp club meetings that I've been to since all over the country around ideas for how clubs and shows can do more together. So it was, I have a goal to try to give a presentation to a stamp club in all 50 states. So the one I did in June was to the second state. I did one in Missouri, and this was the first one out of my home state. And it's also the first club I've returned to as part of this 50 club challenge. So thrilled to be back here. So I've had a lot of fun over this past year and doing all sorts of different things. I had a chance to call my first sale, to actually stand behind the rostrum and actually call a sale. That was over here on the left side in New Orleans. It was a charity philatelic auction with all money that was raised from people buying material, going to different stamp societies and clubs, which was great. Back in the office, which is in Teaneck, New Jersey, excuse me. Again, I mentioned Paul and Josh, and so a little bit of an action shop, and you can see that from box lots to albums to individual stamps, we kind of cover everything. So just something very fun. So these are very rare early Colombian stamps that we were going through, and it was a great opportunity to sort of take some pictures in anticipation of this presentation, in a sense, of kind of how some things are just individual items that we are going to lot up where they will be sold, in this case, as a single set. But sometimes the things are valuable enough where it shows up, for example, on the back of our catalog to give it special sort of recognition when it shows up in people's mailboxes. So this set is what's up there. So there's all sorts of different ways that auction houses can market material based on what it is. So that if we have certain types of material, I'll make a phone call and say to a collector that I know, hey, I know you're really interested in unusual airmail material. You should be aware of what's coming up on our next sale. An auction firm, our responsibility in a sense is people that have consigned material to us. We are responsible for that material, of course, for its safety and security, but also to promote it and to make sure that as many different people that may be interested to bid have a chance to see and inspect that material, because we want to have as many people come into the auction as possible to get the best possible result for our consigners. I had a recent opportunity. I brought some examples of some recent catalogs and some brochures to get a sense of what we do, but just a sense of also our marketing. Had a chance to work on this sale, which just was sold 2 weeks ago. This is the Richard Drew's collection of 1861-68 postal history. Rich is a prominent collector, exhibitor, judge. Has been all over the country. Doesn't live has lived in basically the Midwest, Illinois, now Indiana area for a long time. So really a lot of fun to be able to work through and think about how to describe, and we'll get into talking about considerations when describing material in a moment, but I brought some extra copies of that, if that will be of interest. Which leads us to one of the reasons why I was dragooned into assisting Tom here. This was the best smile I could get on camera with Tom, by the way. So yeah, he's a more spontaneous. Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I wanted to tell a little about our story. So we had, by late summer, we were talking about, Tom had some consideration around wanting to sell some of his primary collections, one being, which I know he's given presentations here on, his Confederate States of America postal stamp and postal history collection. And so, by the way, I hope this is not revealing anything you don't already know, but Tom is quite organized. So this actually, yeah, he's very, very, very organized. And so
Doug, you need to take a picture of that.
yeah. Now that this doesn't mean that, you know, I'd like
You gotta understand, we cleaned up before Alex came.
Yeah. The key to this is that it's funny, some collectors, you know, you walk in and you see this, but actually, you know, then when you kind of dig into the albums and everything, it can kind of be a bit scattershot. And I've walked into rooms where I can't believe anyone can find anything, and the collector knows exactly where everything is. So what's reflected on the surface is not necessarily the organization within, well, but sometimes, and in Tom's case, certainly, maybe disagreement with his, I'll disagree with his wife, or not so much, but he is quite as organized as it looks from the outside. It is internally as well. So we began a discussion around the Confederate States collection. Now Tom has that collection in a sense in two different forms. And so again, the material is a focus on sort of from 1860 when the first state secedes from the Union, which is South Carolina in December of 1860, and goes until the spring of 1865 when the Confederacy collapses and the Union wins, or the Federal forces win the Civil War and surrender by Lee at Appomattox. So the neat thing is that Tom, and we'll get in the conversation, if anyone's interested, we'll talk more about why he acquired things the way that he did, but basically built a big portion of his collection focused on a story that he wanted to tell. And that story was very much on how did the Confederacy get its postal operations underway? And so these are examples of exhibit type pages that Tom prepared, researched, mounted his own material, and from an auctioneer's perspective, this is like manna from heaven and falling on top of me, not because of how wonderful the material is, but also it's an incredible, not just starting point, but a really excellent, almost like if you've got steps, and the higher that you can stand, the closer you are to your goal. Well, the better researched the material is, the better prepared it is and organized, it's that much easier to begin at a much higher point for my effort in order to get a collection like this prepared for auction. So, you know, his own research notes were included. He had backup materials that were included alongside of these, including, you know, where he bought some of this material. So I was able to go back and look at different records related to where it had come from before they were in Tom's collection. So really very nice. So one exhibit focused on this material from sort of late 1860 until kind of the mid 1861. Another one focused on an exhibit, a 16-page exhibit that I think he's used in presentations here before, to really talk about what are these stamps of the Confederacy, why were they issued, and what are the differences that make them distinct, and why, how can you tell the difference between one Confederate stamp to the next? So in the same way, prepared in an exhibit format, which made it quite easy to at least get my arms around as I began breaking it up and figuring out how we were going to organize it from there. The second part, so he had these exhibit sort of setups, and then he had another section which, though were in albums, they were in sort of stock page albums, were different, mostly covers that he chose for whatever reason not to include in his exhibits, or he had bought with an interest to maybe use for a different project related to this area of interest, but never quite jumped into it, or like many of us, no matter what you say, I'm sure everyone has happened to them too. He saw something, he thought it looked cool, he bought it because it looked cool, it was interesting to him, even if it had no connection to whatever storyline, it was still of interest to him. So that's going through those can be a little bit more challenging in comparison to someone that's sort of already prepared really excellent notes and mounted pages, but in a different sort of challenge to sort of find and figure out where it fits into the grand scheme. The purpose of this effort is around a single sale that will be a dedicated Confederate States of America sale. We're going to have the majority of it will be Tom's material alongside a few other items that have come in from other consigners. So it's going to be sort of the Confederate States of America featuring the Tom Ross collection, as well as one item that was that we have consigned to us. It's a new discovery of a postmaster revisional, so stamps that were produced, or hand stamps that were produced by Confederate postmasters in these small and large towns all over the Confederacy before the Confederate stamps were in regular supply, sometimes made their own stamps, either very rudimentary stamps or really quite ornate for use in their towns or their city's jurisdiction. This is the very first example of a new town that we previously did not know existed, Salem, Mississippi. It's the only one that's been discovered of a new town that was previously unknown, and here we are. The Civil War ended in 1865. So you have to consider how long ago, 160 years, 161 years afterwards, that we're still making new discoveries. So the first new discovery in about 25 or 30 years. So that's also going to be included in the sale. So trying to bring all these different combination of promotion elements together to get some excitement in the Confederate collector community, as well as people that don't collect this material who we're hoping to inspire to get engaged and get interested. So after we go through, I've got everything I'm going through. These are actually related to the Richard Drew's collection, including items. One item that's at the very top up there is the second item right there. We wanted to get third-party certificates is a big thing, and when your stamps are like Jack was mentioning about the booklet. Having a certificate ahead of time for certain types of material, whether it's about to confirm the genuineness, to confirm the condition is what we expect it to be, can help elevate the confidence that bidders will have when they're looking at an auction. Though at least most American auctions will give the winning bidder an option to have an item sent for a certificate, and if it does not come back as described, they can basically have it returned. They're not obligated to it, or they have the option. It's sometimes much better and easier for peace of mind everyone to have the certificate ahead of time, so that when someone's buying, they're buying at a much higher level of confidence. And so we did that with a variety of items from Rich's collection, and doing the same thing with Tom's as well. So I'm really going to finish this portion of the presentation with just three examples, three kind of fun things to say. Tom and his wife have one daughter, so they really do have a favorite child. But if you have many children, then who could have, you can't really have a favorite one, but certainly that's true, I think, of all philatelists, that it's very difficult to pick your favorite stamp or your favorite cover, the favorite children of your collection, as it were. And so I just picked three here that were quite fun. I mentioned December 20th being a very important date in 1860. This is an example of a cover sent in South Carolina on December 20th with its original letter, referencing the secession the convention that had come together to vote on secession. And this is an example. It's not meant to be necessarily read, but just gives you a sense of the description focus. So the top, basically, in all descriptions around covers, typically is kind of at least in our style, is kind of, what are you looking at? Specifically describing this. It is a Scott number 26. It has a certain cancellation on it. It is being sent to it from a certain place to a certain place, and what makes that significant? So it's it begins the 46-day period of an independent republic before formation of the Confederate States of America on February 4th. That's its focus. Then I basically kind of give a sense, at least it's my style, but different auction houses do it differently, to basically kind of give some historical context. Why should you be excited about this? Why is this interesting? Why should this be part of your thinking if you're a prospective bidder? Why might you want to buy this or bid on this item? And then I try to make sort of my assessment, or try to give it some context around why is this important, if that's relevant. And so in this case, it's profound, because it effectively is the very first day of what would become a rebellion that would lead to April of 1865, with hundreds of thousands of Americans from the North and the South giving their lives and wounded, and just terrible devastation. But it is, postal history is that one category of historical artifact, which is an amazing aspect of our hobby and our focus, that we can tell that to hold something in your hand that you can verify was actually mailed, was actually sent, was actually existed on a certain day, at a certain time, in a certain place. In this case, with the original letter, we know what its purpose was too. What was it carrying? What did that message say? Another example, which I've always loved, and since I picked this one because we're in a university town here with the University of Illinois, it's University of Alabama, so just put that aside. But we also an element around how important universities were and connections. So a similar type of description here. This one has a certificate that was prepared by the Civil War. It's now called the Civil War Philatelic Society. It was at the time called Confederate Stamp Alliance. They've changed their name. So there's a certificate, and then in the Confederate space, the backs of envelopes can be this incredible array, have this incredible array of provenance, stamps, signatures from experts and dealers to former collectors of that item. So in some respects, the back can be almost as interesting as the front of a cover to tell you, well, where's this cover been? Who's owned this item? And some of these markings are for collections that were dispersed 100 years ago. So it's really an amazing element. So I try to emphasize if there's expert markings on the back or provenance stamps, kind of where is this cover coming from? We are all simply the custodians of the stamps and covers that are in our collections, as we all know. So in a sense, to kind of know the backstory of how has this been collected, and for some people, can add a tremendous amount of connection with this object. And the last item, again, not to be reading the whole thing, but actually I was saying to Tom, this cover was actually in his kind of extras that he had, not part of his exhibits. And one of my efforts, I'm having a little fun here, to demonstrate to Tom that we're really putting our best effort in and showing that we are always trying to find an opportunity to add more value to the material that's been consigned to us. As I was looking at this cover, and it was in a dealer sleeve, and just said, Richmond, Virginia to to Guineas Depot, Caroline County, that's all, with whatever the Scott number 1 on it, which is the first Confederate stamp. And I'm looking at this going, Richard Stewart, Guineas. And so I'm doing some research and trying to figure out, can I figure out who Richard Stewart is? And long story short, I've now with 99.99% confidence, this is actually in the hand of a famous Confederate general named Jeb Stuart, writing to one of his relatives. Found another example that had sold similar mourning. This is a black mourning type envelope with this intentional black along the side. Another Jeb Stuart piece written to a different relative, but also at the exact same address. I found some Jeb Stuart signed letters and was comparing. We all can fly spec, but this is particularly important when trying to compare handwriting, but trying to find this, the same types of C's and R's and S's to confirm that we really have the same Jeb Stuart that's not only sending this, but of course writing the address. And so this cover goes from maybe being worth $150 to $300 to maybe being worth $750 to $1,000, maybe more. So it just depends. So instead of just having maybe a paragraph of text, this is me sort of trying to explain how we know what we know about this, and of course trying to give some context on, well, who is Jeb Stuart? And for example, Jeb Stuart was very close friends with another general named Stonewall Jackson, another famous name of the Civil War. Well, Stonewall Jackson, after he was shot and mortally wounded, was actually brought to Guineas Depot in Caroline County approximately a year before this was likely to have been sent. So it's being sent by Jeb Stuart before he would also be mortally wounded later in the war to a relative of his at the place where his very close friend had died, likely just not too far in the past when this was sent. Anyway, so a lot of fun, but that's in a sense the end of my formal presentation. I'll go back to we'll put his beautiful pages behind us. So I was going to take a seat here and have a little bit of a conversation with Tom. And the purpose of this is basically to just, in a sense, make us both available to anyone for questions. But the idea of this presentation really was I was working on the material. I called Tom, or he had called me, and he was asking a question about something, and I was giving him an update on where things were. And we got into a discussion in a way about how this process was working. What was the thing I was working on right now, and what were the next steps before I was ready to go to be put into a full catalog and actually kind of laid out like this. And maybe you said it or I said it, but something along the fact that this would actually make a great presentation topic to sort of talk about how we put auctions together. And he goes, well, guess what I'm doing on February 2nd? And so this is, as long as there wasn't a snowstorm, my plan was to come up and talk about this.
Timing was touch and go there for a while.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, so really, the floor is really open. I'm going to pose one question to Tom, and then I hope that some aspect of this has interested you from either talking about auctions or any aspect. So there's no question off limits, and yes, we are being recorded, so we can always excise some highly confidential piece of information you want to share with everyone here, but I'm okay with ask me anything. But the question I really want to ask is, I've been going through all this material, and I think whenever one thinks about when they're putting their own money into something for their collections, how do you think about or deal with the question of, am I buying, what was I trying to say? put enough money into something to make sure it's something special and worthwhile. So there's a rarity, a condition element, your story, collection, but you know that you're hoping to, at the end of it, someday in the distant future, that you might sell, that you want to still be able to have some or all or more than the value of what you purchased. So how did you make decisions as you were beginning or getting really deep into, let's say, the Confederate area for why were you willing to take a big punt on certain things, and how were you thinking about when you were acquiring this material? How did you think about that?
It's a good question. A lot, in my case, a lot of it was simply the eye appeal that a particular item had. That almost always was the first thing, because invariably at shows or at dealers' tables and whatnot, you get a bunch of stuff and you just sort of sort through it. And so the key thing frequently was, well, this is kind of interesting looking, and it's, you know, it seems to be sound and all of that. And in some cases, and one in particular, was when I was going through this process at a dealer's table, and there was a fellow that was also a member of the society that this meeting was associated with, who is kind of the leading expert on military usage in the Civil War. And I'm looking at this cover, and he looks over and kind of looks over my shoulder and said, "That's an earliest known use from that post office. So I'll have this one, thank you very much." And so sometimes it was just kind of serendipity, that you just be in the right place at the right time and you would get some information. There was another cover that came about when I had the Confederate exhibit that I had at IndiePex and then took it down to Florex. And there was one of our members of the society there was a very well regarded Floridian postal history expert, and basically he sort of indirectly, because he did it through somebody else that was part of the society, says, "I've got a cover that'll work well for you." And it was one that I didn't have. I'd forgotten now whether it was Secession Day. May have been Florida Secession Day, but in any case, he had that out of his collection, that he had basically two covers that took care of that date. And so he just said, would you like to have this one? And the same way, he says, "Yes, sir. How many?" And it sort of, I honestly don't remember what I paid him for that, but it wasn't free. But he wasn't looking to make a big profit or anything. He was simply aware of the fact from my exhibit that I had this kind of material, and he had spotted there was a hole in it that I needed to fill. And so, he said, "Would you like this?" And, "Yes, sir. I certainly would like it." And at that time, when I actually got the cover from him, I also got an excerpt from one of the Florida Society publications that gave a lot more background on that particular one. So some of it is just blind luck. You wind up falling into stuff. But mainly it's just the things that catch my eye. And, I look at it and say, this looks good. I will say I missed the Jeb Stewart reference, and so good job.
Yeah, right.
But others just going online and, doing simple-minded research that brings out a lot of the detail that you can, by adding it into, this is true especially on exhibits, but even for just the regular collection material, it gives so much more character to the material that you have that makes it much more enjoyable. And so that's kind of what drives me. It just, and there was always the thing, gee, I'd love to have that. Oh, that's too damn much. I can't afford that. So, there is a reality that comes in that has to be taken into account. But sometimes you just, you make a value judgment and say, well, I can get 3 or 4 or 5 things, or I can get this one. I'd like to have that one, but then I got to get rid of this other stuff. So, anyway.
Alex, when you're doing organizing for the auction, how do you determine whether or not one item that might be part of this collection or exhibit or whatever is worth pulling out as an individual item, does that, how do you value that in terms of the collection intact is worth X amount of dollars, but this one item may sell for a lot more on its own?
You're asking, you're asking, actually, like a very simple question that can have many answers and can actually be quite complex. So let me back up a second, just give some context for everyone. So the idea basically is, all right, the objective of an auction is we want to draw people in, and in particular, have material that not just one person that's come in wants to bid and, you know, at the starting bid or more, but many people. So the key to this is that we have sometimes material that comes from a collection like Tom's, where he'll have a series of duplicates, or someone has an entire US stamp collection, for example, and there are maybe 10 things in it that on their own might sell for $200 or $500 a piece. So, but then lots of things in it that wouldn't sell for more than $1 a piece, or $5 or $10. If you remove all of the items that are $250 to $500 or $250 to $1,000 from that collection in this hypothetical example, it could make selling the rest of the collection impossible. So there are certain times when you want to keep items that might otherwise, in certain circumstances, be excellent standalone item lots with the broader context collection that it's with. I give the example again of the US stamp collection, because it helps elevate the interest that the bidders that are coming to the auction would have to buy the whole collection and not sell, you know, the 10 items, and then it's, well, what do we do with, it's the classic problem, unfortunately, with basically United States stamp collections after, say, 1940. A lot of it is face value or under face value. Yes, there's a Scott 1053, the $5 Hamilton. There are some stamps that do not quite follow that range, but for the most part, they're sort of and everything else. And so in order to get someone to come into the sale and be willing to have any value attributed to the post-1940 section, you got to leave a lot of meat in the pre-1940 section. Now with specialty collections, it's a little bit more complicated. And again, there's so many ways to answer this question, but in Tom's example, there are, he has different groupings of maybe $50, $100, $150 single items that are all related to a particular, or all have a particular Confederate States stamp on them. So in those cases, making little study collections or study lots of, say, maybe here are 8 stamps and 7 covers, all with Scott number 11 on them. And basically putting them together, again, with the purpose of either enticing someone who has a deep Confederate interest, in a sense, the Tom Ross of 10 years ago, who's coming to the auction to say, oh, I really like this stamp. Oh, here's a way to kind of buy a group of them and kind of start to dive more deeply. Additionally, we're all, dealers and professionals are a very important part of the auction bidding and buying world. It's also enticing dealers to be interested in and engage as well is of course of interest to us. So in that situation, you might leave a certain item that's on the edge of, well, maybe this of these 15 items in this lot, maybe this one would be good as it's on its own, but actually it might be better because there's a better conditioned example that's very similar that we do have as a single item. So having the two might diminish the interest in the slightly better version. So let's take this, I don't want to call it second place, but second place in a sense, and let's have it be the highlight of this study accumulation or this small collection grouping. Lotting in auctions is probably one of the most difficult, or the thing that I would say every auctioneer would probably say is the skill that's really quite something that comes with time and experience. Though I've been working with Charisson Auctions only now for a little over a year, I had been a stamp dealer. I held my first table at a stamp show when I was 13 years old. I've been involved in the professional side for a long time, but it is challenging to sort of, where is the cutoff point? How do you decide what that's going to be? Other auction firms also have minimum lot values, so it depends on kind of what your minimum lot value is. But in our case, typically, if something's going to have a starting bid of $150 or $200, it better be pretty nice. It better be either special in some way, have an interesting story, or be a condition element that's very, very nice. So our typical average starting is and the low end would be the $250, $300 to $500 is kind of the sweet spot. So if there's a lot of items that would otherwise be $100 a piece, putting them all together is not us copping out or giving up or not trying to do our best. It's trying to create a lot of value and trying to make the group altogether more appealing to a wider range of people. When the individual items, if we sell 6 of them for $100 and the other ones get no bids, well then we're kind of worse off than if we could sell all of it for $800 or $900 for those 15. I gave a lot of hypotheticals there and waved my hands around a lot. But if I get at the core of your question about how to make this determination of what to lot together and how to lot something separately.
Yeah, because as a collector, we're doing a totally different perspective. We're trying to put things together in whatever organized group we're trying to put together. And ultimately, you're taking it apart so that it becomes more saleable.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're unnatural. They're not natural partners all the time between how one collects or how naturally philatelists collect whatever they're collecting with how the market goes to buy. Or correct, there's a weird kind of building and taking apart. At the same time, sometimes the best way to sell a certain collection is all together because a combination of the sort of 80-20 rule, but really it's more sometimes 90-10 rule. 10% of the number of items make up 90% of the market interest and the value often. So if you take those 10% out, there may be no real buyer for the rest of it, and it's all the value per item is 25 cents a piece. You're never gonna sell it in an auction environment. Dan, please.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations or advice for the uninitiated? Pitfalls to be wary of when consigning. For just anecdotally, I ran into an issue, this was probably 6 or 7 years ago, that had I known at the time, I would have handled things differently. And that is how different auction houses handle reserves differently. Yes. I consigned a couple of items to an auction, and one of them was extremely scarce, but I knew it would only have narrow market interest. It was a very specialized item. It was one of the rarer overprints, one of the Togo overprints, one of the German stamps. And I had gotten the Sismondo cert on it, so I consigned it. In talking with the auction house, I asked, well, how do you plan to offer this? What are you going to start it at? And the person I spoke with and dealt with had mentioned a number, and that was great. I figured it would be fine. Well, when it came up for actual bidding on the podium, the person started at roughly half of what we had talked about. Well, as it turns out, the person I had been working with never communicated with the actual auctioneer, and I didn't know enough at that time to realize I should have gotten that in writing. It should have gotten as a contract, detailed that for this item it wasn't to start. And I don't know how normal that is or is not.
Great question. So yeah, so let's talk. So pitfall. We'll talk about the pitfall, or we'll talk about just this particular category you're describing. So yeah, there's no doubt in the philatelic world, as any dealer will tell you, and maybe many of you have also experienced, it's actually an amazing collecting world that probably has a trust level that is higher, in my view, than almost any other collecting field I've ever encountered. It is amazing to me how many people, how many dealers accept checks from people that they've never done business with before, and $1,000 of material might be bought, someone writes a check and hands it over, and how relative to, say, maybe I shouldn't, I'm not casting aspersions on any particular dealer. Yeah, okay. Oh, someone else said coin dealers.
Coin dealers.
No, but there's other fields that certainly have a reputation for having much more problematic categories, and which is of dealers or participants. The nature of I always say philately is the is the hobby of kings and queens. In the sense, I've always felt that we elevated ourselves by having a lot of trust built up. So I mentioned all that to simply say that, in a sense, sometimes the connection that a consignor has with the firm is a bit is trust in a sense. Trust that there's consideration for that they understand the market since they're in the game all the time, that they have a sense of where something should start and what would appeal most, and experience. So that's, I'm sort of trying to cast a positive light on all auction houses that they're, that in a sense, if they have a good reputation, generally, that you sometimes, my recommendation to consigners is you sort of have to trust the process. Now, another element around pitfalls, if you are consigning, in Cherrystone, we talk and think about this, if someone has 25 items they're consigning, individual items, some collections, we usually set, we always set a starting bid, which effectively is the reserve. So it's not, so if the estimate is $1,000 to $1,500, the starting bid is $900. $900 is the reserve. No one can bid $700 and win that item. It's not, in our firm, that's how we set effectively the reserve. There's a starting bid on everything. It's very transparent. Everyone knows that if you bid the starting bid and no one else bids, you could win that lot. It's not, there's no reserve higher up.
I think that varies greatly by auction house because I've been in a number of auctions where if there's about to be a passed auction, rather than allowing it to be passed, the auctioneer will knock down the starting bid in order to entice people.
We will just simply say, and that passes. Like it's very, and actually, by the way, as a real side note, if something passes in one of our auctions, so in the Richard Drew sale, if you were listening online, we about maybe 12 to 15 lots did not sell in the auction. So open starting bid $900, no bids, no bids from the internet, no bids from the phone, and it goes. Within 15 minutes of this auction ending, one or two different people called us up within 15 minutes, and at the starting bid, every single one of those lots sold, because in a sense that is the reserve, that is the starting price. So by within 15 minutes of the end of the sale, 100% of the lots had sold. Even if you've been listening, you would have seen these things were passed.
Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons that may have happened, because I've run into this in auctions. Well, as a buyer, you only have so much of a budget, so you may pass on a lot early in the auction because you are saving money for things that are later, and then you go back to see if items that didn't sell.
Yeah, so absolutely, and that's almost certainly what happened with one of these individuals. And so I also say that if you ever are in an auction environment, especially if you notice later that evening, wow, this lot for whatever price, it doesn't matter, expensive, not expensive, it never hurts to call and ask, is that still for sale, still available for sale? Because you very well may end up getting something that you missed or that you wanted. All right, so I've gone now in a little bit of a circle. So the key to it, back to the 25 lots, is what we do at Cherrystone is we would say, we set these starting bids, and then there's a total value. Let's just say it's $10,000, $15,000 across when you total up all the estimates of these 25 lots. It's really, our estimate has a lot to do with the average of what. So some may, if you trust us, you may say, oh, that one should probably have a higher estimate or this, that. It's like, well, hold on a second. That may, the bidding may bring that one higher, and other ones that you think maybe our estimate's kind of high, maybe only sells for the starting bid. So we look at it as the average, the cumulative estimate. So at the end of the day, we say these 25 lots are worth approximately $15,000. Our objective is to get it, the total, to 15 or more. So not that this is your exact example, but in that example, I would say sort of like, well, if that lot opened way below what you expected, but one of the other lots you consigned got much more than you expected, but maybe this didn't happen. But sometimes we'll even out. I'm not justifying what occurred in that situation, but I'm being careful to say that sometimes collectors and consigners can laser focus in on, well, wait, that lot particularly should be so much more. And it's like, wait, but don't you see these other lots we sold for you sold for a lot more, even if this one sold for less? And sometimes some other people got to get a deal sometime, while others are maybe paying much more than you paid for the lot when you first bought it. The bottom line is, yes, I would say if there's individual items, especially a particular item that you want to make sure that you'd be happy to get it back if it does not sell for X or more, absolutely, you just want that in writing. And similarly, what we do is it depends on what the circumstance is. In Tom's case, since I said you could ask us anything, I'll even just start volunteering information. It was based on trust. Tom didn't say, on this particular cover of my whole collection, I wanted to have a certain start bid. We talked about what we estimated between the two of us, the total value of this collection is, but then he left discretion to us to basically allocate value across items to be able to, again, to energize certain parts of prospective bidding versus setting a start bid on every single item, which could be very disjointed when we put it all together. So in this case, there's going to be, 200 lots, or it's going to have a many, very large lot total. And so that's sort of, it's the aggregate value is what we're aiming for versus individually. But I would say if you're consigning to an auction, you have very specific expectations, but the question you have to ask yourself is, if you have a reserve that you want to set, and the auctioneer goes, well, I don't know, you got to be prepared to get that lot back and get nothing, get the stamp back for it. So is that
Yeah, that
approximately?
answers the question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes.
I have a simple question, probably has a very simple answer. I'm a new collector, I've only been part of the group for about a year, I've only been collecting for about a year.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Of course.
As far as graded stamps,
Mhm.
I know it's a very big deal in sports cards.
And coins, yeah.
And coins. Does it have any effect on values of stamps in auctions?
It does. So let's back up. I'm going to give you a more thorough answer than because you gave me an invitation, gave you a simple answer, so I'm going to give you a non-simple answer. So the grading phenomenon, really, we're now just past 20 years in philately. So in the 2004-05 time is when I would say grading started to pick up. PSE and some other players got in initially. There was the idea of slabbing stamps, similar to what the coin space does, and comic books and cards, where you have this numerical grade out of 100. I would say that probably hasn't taken off nearly as much as everyone expected to that was getting into graded material. But grading is useful, especially for new collectors, to be able to enter a space that I will be the first to admit is not a simple, stamps are not easy. That in the end, if you're spending a lot of money on what amounts to a fragile piece of paper, and you're trying to understand what is the difference between how the image is centered in these perforations, how do you understand how to look at faults and condition? The grading has been an excellent, and people may disagree that might be watching this later, but you're not here, so you can't yell at me if you're listening to this. Grading, I believe, has been an excellent way to help new collectors come in and start to get a sense of what is relative to what to give a certain number on a grading scale. So if something is off-centered or has a fault, the idea that it has a VG 60 out of 100 versus a XF 95 helps people understand relative value and also how to understand condition and how condition can change the value of something. And so that's where the grading sheets that PSE puts out that indicate kind of approximate market value based on a 95, 98, or 90, or 80. So yes, graded stamps still play, and the grading number that's been allocated by these expert committees does definitely make certain categories of, especially United States stamps, easier to sell because there are certain people that are more comfortable engaging when they have this additional data point to understand where is this stamp relative to its peers, 90, 95, and so forth. So I'm kind of I don't personally seek out opportunities to get stamps consigned that we're going to go submit for grading. We use our own evaluation of sort of a grading, and we provide information to prospective bidders to be able to see the stamp, to describe it as condition issues or not, and to make a determination on what its value is. But I do think that grading has a purpose. I know several collectors that probably would not have gotten into stamps over the last 20 years if grading did not exist. That it was a way for them to start spending money in a way that gave them more confidence and assurance that at least what they were spending on had a guide for them that was numerical and a little bit easier to follow. And then since buying graded stamps, one person I think of in particular has gone into so many other areas and directions that grading has nothing to do with, but are much more involved in philately because of it. So I think grading has been an excellent entry point and a very useful guide for many, many collectors.
I think the grading market has changed a lot too. Now I think you see it a lot with classics,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where it has its place. Whereas early on there was the boom in hyper-valued otherwise common modern stamps graded 100,
Yeah.
and then the bottom fell
I was
out of
just
that.
like, look at my, yes, it's right, this is 1986, a little too late, but like the 1945, 3-cent commemorative with jumbo margins, it was getting, $500, $1,000 for these stamps. That's the equivalent I would describe of like people that are spending huge amounts of money on a 2015 silver dollar that just has a high grade,
Right.
but it's not rare. It has nothing. It's simply just a very high condition. Except 90% of those coins have the same condition.
But back in the early 2000s, there were tons of money being spent on graded 100 and 100J
Yes,
modern stamps that, well, if you look through enough sheets,
correct. That's, I think, you're 100% right, Dan, and I think a lot of that has gone away. It has shifted very much to, I would say, stamps before, again, 1925 or thereabouts, but I think there's nothing wrong, and again, it's a way to give yourself some confidence if you're still trying to build your own eye and your own sense of condition grading, to be able to spend money with with relative confidence more than just a stamping put in front of you and, well, should I pay $100 for this or not?
well, if you can get them cheap enough, put together a grading set. That's a big thing in coins.
Yes.
If you specialize in a type, get representative examples so then you can use it as a training tool.
Yeah. Did that, I gave a longer answer, did that answer your question?
I did, I like that.
Okay. What has been your area, what have you focused on collecting as you've gotten in?
I'm still trying to decide what I want to do. I'm into space stamps, space stamps, or the ones with all the perforated stamps, the ones with all the dots in them.
Oh, perfits. Yeah.
Perfits.
Oh wow, that's an area that you can spend the rest of your natural life in. So that's fantastic. Well, again, I've also I've never been a stamp I didn't like, and so it's actually if my wife was here, she'd go, oh my God, that's like the bane of her existence, because I can go in so many different areas. But the key is, that's what, in my view, I realize I'm in the auction business, and we're focused on, because we have to stay in business. We focus on selling certain items that are X price and more. But honestly, everyone has to start somewhere. And if what excites you, as you decide, continue exploring and finding, are areas that, where you never spend more than $5 on a stamp, you can collect forever. It's amazing. At the same time, if the goal is to collect where the focus is to spend money to enjoy and accumulate and to collect, but you're hoping to have a way of selling everything from a point of ease in the future, then you got to be more careful about how you buy, because, and again, something that's worth $5 today, just as a general rule, is unlikely to be worth more than $5 50 years from now. It's just not the market in philatelic material. What was expensive 50 years ago basically remains expensive today, and what was relatively, there's lots of exceptions to this, what was relatively inexpensive to access and to buy 50 years ago remains common or inexpensive today. So that's a consideration at all times when, what is your objective? Is it hobby, is it enjoyment, or is it you're trying to build something that retains and is easier to get a big portion or some portion of the value out at the end? That's a whole other conversation, which I'll answer more questions on, but yeah, other questions.
Okay, looking through here, and just in general, talk about buyer's commission, which some people call the gouge. I mean, what's the point of adding 15% to it when the knowledgeable people just knock 15% off their bid?
Good question. So it's the gouge, it's the tip, it's the juice, there's lots of great phrases. So, all right. So buyer's premium. So there's the economics of an auction are basically as follows. From the auction house perspective, there's of course what we call the hammer, which is the actual bidding that takes place. $100, $200, $300. All right, and no more bids. It hammers for $300 in this example. So that's the first number that really matters here. Now, there is often a seller's commission, so there's an amount of money that the consignor, a percent that they will in effect pay, but it's not really paid. It's a percent that comes out of that hammer price. So whatever that percentage is, it comes out. And then in our case, I will point out that we have the lowest buyer's premium of any of the major auction firms in the United States, and really the European auction houses are even higher than the U.S. on average. So ours is a 15%, and yes, 25 years ago, lots of auction houses were 10%, and it has gone up. We've held tight and very intentionally at 15%. In a sense, buyer's premium is an element like sales tax in a way, though we're not a governmental entity, that makes it so that the bidder sort of focuses on these hammer prices, and that is effectively our overhead, or the way that we make money to be able to run the auction itself. And John Walter Scott ran the first stamp auction in New York in 1870, and then a couple years later in London. The idea of a premium or sort of a percentage on both sides, I don't know if it was part of the first auction in 1870, but has been a mainstay of auctions, not just in the philatelic space, but outside of philately for a very long time. And what you just said actually is 100%, I'm a believer that what you said is correct, that yes, the rational auction buyer says to themselves, well, if I'm only willing to spend $1,200 on this stamp, well, I'm going to bid just accordingly to basically where my, where my bid needs to be. So once you add 15%, it's at $1,200 or less. In a sense, it's a competitive element. So instead of taking the percentage out of the seller side of it and making it zero to the bidder, it ends up being economically for the seller the same. Because if you're going to spend, if I said there was no buyer's premium, you'd bid up to $1,200. But if we took the commission in order to keep our lights on and just made it part of the seller's commission, what we take basically to subtract before we pay the consignor. I keep pointing at Tom, here's the consignor. Tom represents all consignors. So in the end, the consignor is he's equal whether we take the 15% and the bidder bids a little bit less, or we take the 15% from the seller side. The same outcome happens for the consignor.
To the uninitiated, though, it does seem a bit extreme, especially now where some auction houses are 22, 23% buyer's commission, plus presumably 10 to 20% coming from the seller's side of the equation. So is the auction house gaining 40 to 50% or 35 to 45% when all is said and done?
So I'll just give you a sense. Our standard commissions, average commission rate is we have a 15% buyer's premium, which I repeat to the recording especially, is the lowest buyer's premium of the mainstream auction firms in the U.S. and really globally. And then our top sort of rate on the seller side is 15%. So our max is at 30, which is in short are. Now, I'll point out things that we do that cost money, which I know I don't take any comment or question here as adversarial in any way. I hope my answers are not either. But I mean, we print 1,000 catalogs and mail them. So in a sense, we don't charge the bidders or prospective bidders to receive the catalogs. So we need a way, if anyone knows anything about costs of printing or shipping, mailing these days, we need to have a way of drawing in some revenue to be able to cover the cost of running the sale. Any sale that you may encounter on Stamp Auction Network, which is a big aggregator service, or Philisearch is a big one in the UK, in Europe, they do not those listings are not free. They are thousands of dollars actually to put those up. So yes, one could definitely look at different auction firms that are charging even more from a commission perspective and be a little bit more negative because the bigger chunk that they're taking out maybe doesn't seem appropriate. I won't comment about any other firms, the appropriateness of their cost structure. Sherry Stone and what I've come to learn and really appreciate about the business that I've joined, it's a family business, a third generation family business. I'm the first non-family member to work for them in a long time, is that they are a lean operation. We are a lean operation. So we don't have massive overheads. On the day after a sale, everyone does shipping. On the day of a sale, we're all doing the sale. So we keep overhead low in order to be able to move faster and also to be able to keep our expenses down so we can, from our perspective, be competitive, because whenever you made a comment about 22%, whenever we're competing to get a consignment, well, to your point, sir, and you are 100% correct, and it's like you were taking the words out of my mouth that I always am using in this environment. Well, someone will say, well, the other auction firm is offering X seller's commission. I say, right, but they have a 7% higher buyer's premium. So bidders are just going to bid 7% less than relative to ours. So if they have a 0% seller's commission, but have a 22% buyer's commission, That's the same as us having a 15% buyer's commission and a 7% sellers. And I have to often re-explain this to people because, again, the way that 0 sounds a lot of the time, or 10% sounds, in the end, it's all in effect the margin that's going to come out on one side or the other. So we consider it a competitive advantage because the lower, in our view, the buyer's premium is, the tip becomes less of a consideration because it's all relative. They'll say, well, at least it's not 22% buyer's premium, so they're willing to bid more. And that's kind of how we have approached our buyer's premium. And we intend on continuing to maintain a lower buyer's premium in order to make it more appealing for people to bid. But these are totally fair because everyone says, what about eBay? And there's no buyer's premium on eBay and so forth. Anyway, so there's lots of different elements, but the question is, what is the auction firm providing? In our case, it's going through, describing, it's presenting it to the market, it is bringing our clients and promoting it, it's the catalogs, so a lot of different pieces. But I'd always remember that, again, if you think about a sale, if we have a sale where we sell, $285,000, or let's say $250,000 in a single sale, as I just told you, our max buyer's premium is 15%, our max sellers is 15%, so that's 30%, and you may say, oh my gosh, that's $75,000. Well, you have to consider what printing 1,000 catalogs, what's shipping 1,000 catalogs, or putting all these different listings all over on these different websites costs. We have to turn our auction on. We have to receive the material. We have to insure the material. We have to actually describe it and pay.
It's all the labor that goes into the stamp.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is another reason, by the way, why a lot of auction firms will set minimums of what they're willing to handle. Our minimum consignment, for example, is $10,000. The reason for that is because a consignment of $1,500, it just isn't, the second we touch it basically and we do anything with it, it costs a couple $100. So instantly, even if it sells for $1,500, it's not worth it. It's just the administration alone. Because we got to send invoices. There's more expense than you'd imagine. This does not make anyone here feel better, but whatever it's worth, the philatelic world is a bargain relative to other collecting worlds in terms of what auction houses charge. You can't even, I'm involved in the military collecting world, the coin and paper money world. 25+% buyer's premiums are common. The art world is exorbitant in comparison to the stamp world, 25, 30, 35%. The estate auction world, like antiques, also going to be incredibly expensive, as is the seller's commission, also going to be incredibly expensive. So you can have this, to your point, about 35, 40% in the military collecting world. That would be like a small margin. So many can be much bigger. But now many of those, then the retort they'll say is, well, stamps are, for the most part, small and lightweight. When you're dealing with antique furniture, you need warehouses, you need staff, the moving of this material, the insurance of it. So different types of auctions have different considerations on their costs. But these are great questions. I appreciate them, but I don't have any qualms about defending our commission structure because we use it as a competitive advantage for selling material, for representing material. A great question. One second, Jack, please.
Well, I was gonna say one quick question, then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
What's hot? What's the like it used to be Chinese stamps 2 years ago?
This is a great question.
What's hot now?
What's hot now? So it's February 2nd, 2026 for the recording purpose. So what's hot now? And it's one of the funny things where someone's going to be watching this recording, 6 years from now and go, no one wants that thing now. This is a very difficult question to answer. So in the last 2 weeks, we've had two sales. I'm going to give just these two anecdotes. The Drew sale had a variety of material that had not been seen on the market in some cases for 30 to 40 plus years. Things he had bought in the 1980s and before. Fresh material that has particular interest where many of the collectors that are interested in it now were not even collecting when it first was available decades ago. I know it's not giving you like a specific category, is hot, meaning items of that have some value, that are well preserved, that were bought thoughtfully in the United States, especially stamps or postal history, always bring a little intrigue to the prospective bidder that's interested in U.S. material, because if they've only been involved for 20 years, first time it's been available in 30 years or 40 years, it instantly draws someone that feels that this is not just more recycled material, something that just shows up every year and it's been sold 10 times in the last 20 years. Do I really want to pay that much more than when it was sold 18 months ago, for example? So I would say material that's relatively fresh to the market always has interest. Last week we had a sale of mostly 20th century specialized Polish material. And you wouldn't think anything of it until almost $750,000 of it is sold in one day. And you go, wow, well, you never think about, specialized 1930s Polish material until stuff is selling for $10,000, $15,000, $25,000. And what that basically signals to me is, actually two things. I'll give a special insight about that. First of all, you mentioned China. It's interesting you said China, because I think of China and India as fields that as their economies began to emerge, I don't want to call them third or second world, but just began to really touch and really roll into first world economies in terms of the wealth being accumulated by people, where they had extra money to now go focus on things where the collecting gene matters, the people that are collectors. So Russia, after the fall of the Soviet Union into the 2000s, Russian material really got a big push. Since 2022, Russian material has not been so hot because of the Ukraine war, and a lot of the Russian collectors are in Russia still, and sanctions. So it's an area that's lost a lot of favor. Whereas Chinese material and Indian material over the last, Chinese materials probably has come up quite a bit in sort of the 90s, 2000s, early 2010s, very hot. I think it's cooled down a little bit for a combination of market saturation and other factors. The Chinese economy is also cooled down quite a bit. You can just do some reading on whole cities that are being built and no one lives there. You've got all sorts of issues but Indian material remains very, very attractive, both because of buyers and collectors in India. Again, as their economy continues to mature, more people that are collectors, philatelic especially, have more money to access material in other countries and to bring it home, to repatriate the material. The Polish material, I don't think I'm sharing any special insight here beyond Poland is probably the country that is really the emerging economy in Europe. They have what now is one of the largest standing armies. They have their country has a much more youthful population as a proportion of their overall age spread than many other European countries. They have exactly the characteristics that I think of around these emerging, not that it's a third world economy just becoming a first world economy, it's been slowly moving since the end of the Cold War, but many of the bidders in this sale are in Poland. And they're spending enormous sums relative to what you think about for this type of material. Many things that we've been selling Eastern Europe material for 60 years, and we were off by, sometimes our estimates were off by 10 times for what the stuff was selling for. So not that you're going to go run, though I do know you like Polish material.
I will be sending you that Polish.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. But one other element is because this material was off the market for a long time, and again, it was off the market from before this whole period where the Polish material is interested. So areas that I think are still very nice. I think material that's got a great story, great eye appeal, to Tom's point about what he was interested in, eye appeal matters. Thinking about, nice condition U.S. material remains in demand. Those are sections of our auction, every single auction that gets a lot of activity, a lot of interest. So again, if you're thinking about buying 10 stamps for $50 or buying the one stamp for $500, on the whole, long term, that $500 stamp, assuming you bought, this is the most amorphous aggregate comment, but in the end, that $500 stamp has a much better chance of retaining its value.
And that's something that's hard for a beginning collector, because looking back from when I've collected stamps, coins, and everything else over the year, the best advice, in my opinion, is start with the keys that you can afford.
Yes. Don't
start with the cheap stuff, because the expensive stuff is going to keep getting more expensive.
No, it's 100% true. And again, it's very difficult because we're collectors. So we, in a sense, the more items you can get, the more exciting it is. So it's harder sometimes to. I see lots of nudging over here. But at the same time, that's not a bad thing either. So again, it's all about what our incentives are here. what is the goal? I would say it's the journey, not the destination. And in the end, that's what this is all about. So you can always collect for the mindset of, if I want to sell it one day, what it'll be worth. But if that's not going to be the path that you're going to be most interested in and get the most enjoyment out of it, don't do that. But at the same time, if you're able, from a financial resources perspective, to be able to put resources in where you can have an outcome like what Tom's collection has, and again, to Tom's point, he didn't say, well, I'm going to pass on these several, these 5 $1,000 covers and not buy those and just buy a $5,000 cover. It was a big range. So that I think in the end has given a lot of diversity to the values of his material, but he was also always trying, I could tell at times, to still get some key items. And that's why I think that his collection altogether will draw an interest, because if you've got if you have a budget of $300, there's something for you. If you've got a budget of unlimited budget or near unlimited budget, there's something, there's something for you there too. So it does depend, but you can go in a lot of directions.
Well, and I think sometimes it comes down to availability. Like in my particular area, U.S. revenues, there are items that only catalog $100, $150, but have populations in single digits.
Right.
Some that haven't even shown up in the market for the last 10 or 20 years. So the time to buy it is if you've ever seen one.
I will give a very straight answer. What was the question you had? Just
Okay,
last time?
I have never done this, which is why I'm asking. How about the stuff that happens after the auction? Say I win something from you. How do I get it shipped to me? What's it cost?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is something an agent used to do for you.
Right.
You would pay the agent, but the agent would take care of the shipping.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
why you do this.
Yeah, so no, we actually use FedEx for everything, and nothing against the Postal Service, just FedEx we found to be even more reliable and easy. Basically, for single lots from us, I think I think it's just $25 is basically the shipping charge for non-box lots,
Okay, so if I win it for $100 and I pay you $100 plus 25, it happens.
Correct. Yeah, we're on our, back to being very lean and very focused on our operations. We also pride ourselves on shipping fast. Like that's the next day. Basically, people, we make it easy to pay, and sort of we try to get stuff out the door because we're always working on the next sale. And as you may have a sense, unlike the Illinois and Missouri markets, real estate in the New York, New Jersey area, commercial real estate is expensive. So we don't have a massive office, so we need to be thoughtful about space and out. So we want to ship the stuff to you as fast as possible.
Because from what I understand, with furniture, there is extra shipping charge.
Oh yeah, we're very
substantial shipping.
Yeah, we're very conscious. We don't charge a handling fee. We are very intentionally lean. I can't speak. I don't know what our competitors are doing at this point. But the stamp world generally, auction houses try to. It's not a big area where we're trying to make money. We're just trying to usually actually take advantage of our commercial rates and pass that discount on.
Typically, in most auctions that I've seen, if it's a bulk lot or an oversized lot, it will say in the listing, additional shipping charges apply.
Yeah.
So contact the auction house,
Yeah.
I would say, and find out what range you're talking about.
Yeah, but the typically $1 to $2 per pound is kind of how you could think about what it would cost you. So if you're buying a 50-pound box lot, it could cost you $75 to $100 of extra shipping. But you can to Dan's point, you can definitely call ahead to get estimates, and they'll say, oh, we think that here's the estimate of what it would be. But it's a great question. Don't ever, the best thing I would always say is don't ever let an auction firm, ours included, befuddle you with terms of service, though we try to be Cherry Stone tries to be as straightforward as possible. You can always ask questions before the sale. You could always, we're always wanting to help someone who's trying to figure out if they're going to bid or not. That's a good call. We want to answer your questions. So any firm, no matter who you might be wanting to bid with or do anything with, always ask. I would say that probably the biggest mistake pitfall is common. Biggest mistake people make is deciding that they're going to bid or get involved in an auction, consigning or buying, but they've got questions, but they're nervous about asking them, or they feel ashamed is the wrong word. They feel they feel like everyone knows this, but I don't want to admit that I don't know it. Put all of that shame aside. You should ask questions. It's very important to understand whenever you're engaging especially in the philatelic world. That includes buying something new for your collection. If it's an area that you haven't bought in before, you should ask a whole bunch of questions before you buy it. Tell me, why is this $500? Like, tell me, sort of make the dealer really sell it to you. Like, why? So I've got lots of thoughts on how the philately can do a better job of educating new people. But with auctions, I would say when you don't know, ask. Don't let things sit out there and be frustrated later when something happens that you weren't aware of. If that helps.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, the basic factor is, you will take care of it for an extra amount of money, I don't have to find some shipping company in New York City
No,
that'll,
but it's interesting you said that, because you're right. In the antique space, many auction firms will not do in-house shipping. We do all of our shipping in-house.
Yeah.
But you're correct. Many other industries, auction firms, will give you a list of, well, here's our 6 third-party shippers, and you got to call them and screw around, and you don't want to do any of that. I realize from a time perspective, I really want to thank everyone, because Tom and I were talking on the phone as I was driving up here, and we were a little worried that there would be no questions, or we would sort of be like, what are we going to talk about? I really appreciate everyone's questions in all forms, and I hope very much to be welcome back at a later point to come and be here with all of you for another meeting.
Definitely, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
How often do you guys do the auction?
Yeah. Oh, so that's right. I've got a couple. If you're interested, these are some past sales from the